This is outrageous. The fact that they shut down this investigation shows that there's something to hide. If there was nothing to see, Justin Trudeau should have welcomed this committee and allowed the committee members to get to the bottom of it.
Allegations of overreach by the Prime Minister's office were the focus of an emergency meeting here in Ottawa earlier. Members of the House of Commons Foreign Affairs Committee discussed claims that the PMO unfairly pressured former diplomats over their public comments about China. Opposition MPs filed a motion to investigate further, but the Liberals rejected that motion. Take a listen.
It's a very difficult position for a public servant to be in when the Prime Minister's office calls and asks them to do something. These are serious allegations that merit an investigation. This Prime Minister has shown a pattern of behavior to attempt to silence anyone who would challenge or criticize the government's approach to anything.
I have seen the most unbelievable cascade of scandal and cover-up in my lifetime under this Prime Minister and under this PMO.
I am very distressed, actually, more distressed than I had been when I simply read the notice of motion at the tone, at the idea, and at the allegations that are being cast about by members of the opposition. Global Affairs Canada engages with people outside government all the time. There was no intention, nor was there any instruction from anyone, including the PMO, that Mr. Mulroney clear his public statements with the government.
MP Bayliss. Nay. MP Saini.
Nay. The motion is defeated 5-4.
The emergency meeting was called after two former ambassadors to China said they were contacted by Global Affairs Canada and encouraged to speak with one voice on the China dispute. The Globe and Mail initially reported that. So what happened during those conversations? And does it amount to political interference? Guy Saint-Jacques served as Canada's ambassador to China from 2012 to 2016. He's now senior fellow at the University of Alberta's China Institute and joins us from Montreal via Skype. Hi, Mr. Saint-Jacques. Nice to see you again.
Nice to talking to you.
The Liberal members, Mr. Saint-Jacques, of the House Foreign Affairs Committee voted a little bit earlier today against a motion calling for the committee to conduct a study into the calls that both you and another former ambassador to China, David Mulroney, received from a senior global affairs official. Essentially, the motion was killed because of those votes. Your reaction to that?
Well, in a way, I'm not surprised, knowing that there is a Liberal majority. Of course, if I had been asked to go to Ottawa to testify, I would have been very happy to go and to meet with the members of the committee.
Do you think it's something that deserves further study? The idea that both of you were called and the nature of those calls?
Well, I'm not sure that it's worth pursuing because in my case, at least, I never felt that they were trying to muzzle me or that they were threatening me. I think basically it's another example of miscommunication. In this case, I don't know if the miscommunication happened when the Prime Minister's office asked Mr. Topol to phone me and David Mulroney, or if it was once it got into global affairs. But of course, when you get a call from a senior official that says that he wants to relay a message from the Prime Minister's office, your curiosity is piqued. And I was looking forward to hear more about what they had in mind. And of course, I'm all in favor of trying to reinforce the actions of the government to try to free Mr. Spavor and Mr. Kovrig. I have offered suggestions in the past about what the strategy the Canadian government should follow. I will be happy to do that in the future. But when I spoke with Mr. Topol, I said, if you are telling me that we should speak with one voice, it would be useful for me to know more about the strategy pursued by the government, because at this stage, I'm not clear on what it is exactly, apart from the fact that we are seeking support from allies. And this is a suggestion that I made back in December to people at Global Affairs, and I think it has worked. And we should continue with this, but at the same time, we should recognize that we will need more than that if only because the extradition process of Mrs. Meng could take years. And China is an authoritarian country that will want to continue to punish us. We already suffer. We have lost at least $5 billion in sales. Canadian farmers have received a tremendous hit by the sanctions taken by China. And therefore, any effort that can be done to try to resolve the problem, I'm all in favor, and I'm very supportive, but I would need to know more about exactly what I can do. And if I have said anything that folks at the Prime Minister's office didn't like, well, I would like them to contact me directly and discuss the issue.
So what did he say when you said that? When you said, I'd like to know more about the strategy, and if I've done something to aggravate the Prime Minister's office, contact me directly. What was his response?
Well, he couldn't give me any specific example. I think they were more concerned about some of the remarks of my former colleague, David Mulroney. David had spoken. In fact, he had been very outspoken on the travel advisory, saying that Canadians should refrain from going to China, that businessmen should go there only if they need to, if there's an urgent issue, but that Canadian tourists should go to other places where you have freedom of expression and where the government has not put a million Uyghur in jail. And so... but Paul was, he also said that if I were to go to Ottawa, it would be useful for me to meet with the new Deputy Minister of Global Affairs. And I said I would be happy to sit with Mrs. Morgan to offer views on how to manage the crisis. And I can tell you also that I have had two subsequent conversations with people at Global Affairs after the call of Mr. Topol to reassure me that nobody wanted to muzzle me, that in fact they appreciated the advice that I had provided, and that they look forward to future contacts. So again, for me, while I remain perplexed by the conversation I had with Mr. Topol, I think basically it was a problem of communication.
And were those follow-up calls from other senior level bureaucrats, or were they from the minister, for example, or was it people just within Global Affairs?
Well, one was with a senior official, and the other one was what I would call at a very appropriate level.
Can I try and read between the lines? Is that a politician then versus a bureaucrat?
Yes, it was a politician.
And are you uncomfortable sharing if it was the minister or the prime minister?
Well, I would need to seek the permission to reveal the details of this conversation, but I was completely reassured that nobody wanted to muzzle me. And in fact, I was told that freedom of expression was very important, and that therefore I should continue to express my views as freely as I wish.
So let me just pick up on that last point. I'm just wondering, based, Mr. Saint-Jacques, on your experience, the opposition is contending that there was an attempt by invoking the Prime Minister's office and by talking about the election environment in the call with Mr. Mulroney, as Mr. Mulroney has recounted, that there is sort of an attempt of inappropriate political interference. Was the Prime Minister's office invoked specifically in your conversation, and what about the election environment?
Well, as I said earlier, at the outset of the conversation, Mr. Topol said that he was phoning me to pass on a message and a request from the Prime Minister's office. And the request was to try to speak with one voice. But I must say, in the conversation that I had, I don't recall any mention of the upcoming election. This being said, I'm not surprised by the reaction of the Conservative Party. I think if I were in their shoes, I would probably do the same and try to make hay of anything. But again, for me, I think it's. I don't think that there will be much of a follow-up to this. Of course, I would like to get more clarity on where this miscommunication occurred. But again, I was reassured by the calls that I received after the initial conversation with Mr. Topol on July 22nd, and I'm ready to continue to work with people in Ottawa to try to find ways to manage this crisis with China.
Okay, I'll leave it there. Thank you so much, Mr. Saint-Jacques. Really appreciate your time as always this afternoon.
Thank you.
MPs will not be investigating allegations that a government official inappropriately pressured two foreign Canadian diplomats. Last week, former Canadian ambassadors to China, David Mulroney and Guy Saint-Jacques, said they were called by a global affairs official speaking on behalf of the Prime Minister's office. They say the official suggested they coordinate with the government before speaking publicly on the contentious China file. Liberals on a House of Commons committee voted down a proposed study into the allegations, insisting no ministerial direction was given. Conservatives say it amounts to another cover-up in the vein of the SNC-Lavalin affair. So what is really at play politically here? The Power Panel is with us to discuss. Tiffany Gooch is a political consultant and columnist. She joins us from Toronto. Here with me in studio, Françoise Boivin is a political commentator and former NDP MP. And Tim Powers is Vice Chair of Summa Strategies. Hi, everybody.
Hello.
Nice to see you. And I will add to that, just for our viewers that might be joining us now, that Mr. Saint-Jacques, who also received a call, said that the Prime Minister's office was invoked, said that shortly following that, he got a call from another bureaucrat, and then what turned out to be the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Chrystia Freeland, to say, we are not trying to assure you, we are not trying to muzzle you. You can speak freely. Still, to get your response first, Tiffany. I mean, there's a reason that this is still being discussed, at least politically, here on the Hill. Mr. Saint-Jacques did confirm, as Mr. Mulroney said, that the Prime Minister's office was initially invoked in that call, and that although Mr. Mulroney said the election environment was discussed or brought up, that it was, Mr. Saint-Jacques said it was not with him. So I'm just wondering, from your perspective, what you think from a political perspective, how this plays out.
Yeah, so I think much ado about almost nothing here. I think we're definitely in a space where it would make sense for each of those offices to be looking to collaborate and ensure that there is consistency in messaging and understanding among all of the players of what's taking place. And I think a good stakeholder strategy would ensure that former diplomats are engaged, what that engagement looks like, that how periodic that is, who that's coming from, is all up in play. And I think this is a case of a miscommunication of in one case of something that was intended to ensure some sense of understanding from all players that are going to be speaking to this in the public, but not necessarily meant to be directive. And so I think this is not something, with the exception of those that are trying to make it more of a political issue in the summer and lead up to an election, isn't such that.
There's nothing in the resumes or repository of history that we know about Mr. Saint-Jacques or Mr. Mulroney to say that they're looking to make something out of nothing. They have nothing politically to gain here. Neither is looking to run in the election.